Joining us now, President and CEO of AdvaMed, Scott Whittaker, and that's the world's largest medical technology association. AdvaMed members make the medical devices, diagnostic products, and health information systems that have transformed healthcare, disease detection, less invasive procedures. And right now, Scott and his organization, they're on the front lines of the president's mission to retool themselves to get these medical supplies out. And he's with us now, Scott Whittaker. Scott, thanks for being with us, sir.
Hey, John. Good to be with you today.
Scott, your role now is taking on major significance for the betterment of the country. You're like in the war mode supply chain now. You're one of the key influencers that are getting things done. Tell me a little about how some of the companies that you represent, working with the administration and the various states, have stepped up to provide the PPEs and provide medical ventilators, medical equipment that we need in order to get through this pandemic.
So, John, it's never a role you aspire to be in, but once the crisis hit us, we were glad to be on the front lines dealing with this. Companies in our space are doing the diagnostic testing work that's being done. We're developing and manufacturing the personal protective equipment, as you mentioned, and then essentially all the supplies that are in a hospital room, including ventilators. So essentially everything that's being done right now to test and treat people with COVID-19, with the coronavirus, is being done by our companies, along with, obviously, the leadership of the doctors and nurses in the hospitals. So it's a tough time, but I will tell you, our companies have stepped up in a tremendous way to meet the challenge. I'll start, John, on the diagnostic side. When we first learned that there were some challenges with the original test out of the CDC, it was our companies that stepped up and began to produce on a mass scale diagnostic testing to try to test individuals and determine whether or not they had the disease so we could begin the appropriate treatment protocols. And we've done that in a tremendous way. The administration's been very good to work with on this, and we're now at the point where we're testing about 2 million people, which is great progress. And so that and other areas, we've been very, very active.
I want to get down to that a little bit because testing has been, one of the major things that the president said is critical. We were a little bit behind the curve on it. Now we've stepped up. As you said, 2 million Americans tested so far. Give me an example of some of the companies that you represent that have stepped up and put now the U.S. in the position where we've tested more than anybody in the world.
Yeah, it's essentially every company that's in the diagnostic space. So Roche would be an example. BD is a great example. Hologic is another example. Abbott, the 5-minute test that was produced recently, is another example. Quidel, Qiagen, a whole list of these companies. Let me give you an interesting story, John, because I know a lot of people question whether or not the government is responding appropriately or aggressively enough. I was talking to one of the CEOs of one of these companies who said one of the tests that they produced early in the process normally takes about a year to get through the approval process at FDA. It took a week after we got a call and realized the urgency of this. The FDA expedited that, got it through their system and into market very quickly so we could begin to test. That's very, very good leadership and cooperation between the public and private sector, and patients are benefiting from that today. And that's why this collaboration right now is so important. The work we're doing with the White House Task Force has really been very productive.
Scott, let me just ask you this straight up. I mean, to go from 1 year, 52 weeks, to 1 week to get the testing approved in order to get it to people and get it to the market that quickly. How did you do that, Scott?
So I think there's two aspects of it. We had a whole of business approach on our side, on the private industry side, and focused all of our employees on trying to get the research done necessary to scale that test up and get it approved. Mm-hmm. On the other side, I think it's pretty clear. The government was very forceful in its directive to remove every regulatory hurdle they possibly could to expedite the review and approval process to make sure that it got on the market. And the private sector stepped up in a big way. The government did the same thing. So we've been engaged in daily and calls with the FDA commissioner, with the leadership of FDA. They've been very good in interacting with us and letting us know what information they need in order to approve it really quickly. That's great leadership. It comes from the White House. It comes from the vice president who's leading the task force and the whole government approach that they've taken. and that's trickled down to these tests, and it's had a huge impact.
So two things: whole of business approach, where you basically were able to get all of the companies that had the capacity to produce these in the diagnostic space, get them together, get them geared up. But then the key was getting the government to act swiftly and get rid of the regulations and the bureaucratic hurdles that have been
Right.
put in place. Scott, I mean, it's like over a very long period of time, we have all these bureaucratic regulations, et cetera. Get the government, because of Trump's emergency order, to plow through those, get them out of the way, so we could take them to market. Wow.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's been very clear that that's happened in this case. We've seen it on the diagnostic side. We're seeing it in the personal protective equipment to some degree, and then in the ventilator space as well, where we have all the companies who are developing these ventilators in the traditional medical technology space, and we've found the administration to be very helpful there too.
Okay, so I'm going to get to PPP in a minute. We're with Scott Whittaker. He is now part of the U.S. Command Center supply chain, not exactly volunteered for the position, but came to it. He's the president and CEO of AdvaMed. That's the world's largest medical technology association. Scott, so let's get to PPEs a minute, because if you're in the media like me, the first thing we heard is there were not enough tests, there were not enough tests, there were not enough tests. Now we're out testing everybody in the world, and it sounds like the production capacity you have and the whole of business and government approach that you took so far, 2 million tests, I would assume that production keeps going up. Other thing we hear over and over and over is there's not enough PPE, not enough masks, not enough protective personal equipment for doctors, RNs, LPNs, people in the medical field, and that seems to be going on for weeks, trying to get that crisis. I know the president, under his Emergency Production Act, has gotten some things done. Can you elaborate? What are we doing in the PPE arena?
Yeah, in the PPE space, the regulatory hurdles aren't the biggest challenge we have. It's scaling up to produce on a mass level and then allocating and distributing those to the right locations right now. You're right, John. Originally, there was a lot of concern and fear that we didn't have enough supplies in the personal protective equipment space. I think to some degree that has been rectified now. I think of the announcement one of our companies, 3M, made recently that they're planning to import 166 million respirators over the next 3 months to help support doctors and nurses who are on the front line. These are the very important masks that really provide that protection when you're treating a COVID patient. And so that's one example of many others. The other thing that's been very encouraging is it's not only the traditional medical technology companies that are doing this. We've had companies outside of our space that have volunteered to help out. I'll give you an interesting example. I was talking to the COO of Apple recently, who volunteered to help us bring product in from outside of the country where some of these things had been manufactured in the past. And we would add on to a shipment or a cargo plane that they're bringing into the country to help bring more masks in, while we're also scaling up production here as well. So we've gotten a lot of support and help from other industries, and that's been really encouraging. And I think, again, it's because we've all wanted to rally behind the leadership of the president and take on this challenge head on, and we're doing it quite well. So I think in PPEs we're in a better place now, but there's more to come. It's especially if the virus continues to spread. We'll stay on that.
How the companies that you represent in the medical field that were known for producing PPEs now, how are they helping other companies that are transitioning their factories or transitioning their manufacturing to produce PPEs? Is there a commonality? Do you get to work with them now or show them your expertise? Like Company A that does medical PPEs is now working with, General Motors in order to get them to produce masks. How does that all work, Scott?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So what we've done is, in one case, we've open sourced a product that one of our companies had been manufacturing to share that broadly with anyone who wanted to get into the space and manufacture along the design lines that we had set up, right? And so open sourcing something like that gives everyone the opportunity to see the design elements of it and then begin to create a product that's similar to that because of the emergency crisis that we're facing. We're also doing that on a company-by-company basis. As a company may call and say, how can we help? We'll put our experts on manufacturing in contact with their experts on manufacturing and help them understand what the production process looks like, what they need to do, and how they need to scale up. And so those collaborations are ongoing every single day, and I think that's why we're starting to see the industry broadly meet the demand that's out there.
I have to commend the companies you represent, because under normal circumstances, companies wouldn't want to share their technology to create a competitor, if you will. So this is not easy to do, Scott. What you're doing is getting everybody to work together. Because, look, if I'm CEO of a company that produces PPEs, and this is the business I'm in, and I have technology and I have economies of scale, I don't want to go create a competitor that's now going to compete with me when this is over, but it's the right thing to do in this crisis.
It's the right thing to do because it is a crisis. Our country is dependent on us delivering for people so that we can get the economy back working again. And it's important for all of us to work together right now. For us, it's not about profits. It's about patience. And it's about getting people back to work. That's our sole focus, and that's why you see this collaboration at such a high level. Man, it's a great American business success story, and I think in reflection, we'll all be really proud of what we've contributed here.
You know, I'm going to repeat what you just said. We're with Scott Whittaker. He's president CEO of AdvaMed. This is the world's largest medical technology association, representing many, many companies in the med tech and diagnostic field. And he said, look, we're at a time right now, Scott just said, where this is not about profits. It's about patience, and it's about putting people back to work as quickly as we can. That's a great attitude to take. I'm going to get to ventilators here in a minute, Scott. But I just want to say, Democratic Senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, is telling the president that we need a United States supply chain commander. Well, if we do, I nominate Scott Whittaker for that job. I think it'd be great in that job, because you're doing it now, and you have to bring all of these disparate factions together. That's what a supply chain commander has to do, right? You have to be able to lead, bring all of the factions together, get all the competition out, have the right attitude, which is not about profits. It's about patience and getting people back to work. So I'm going to send Chuck Schumer an email today and say, I got the perfect guy for you, Scott Whittaker. I'm going to send your email. I think it'd be outstanding for that. Now, it's a volunteer job, though.
I was going to say that's very kind of you, but I think FEMA's doing a very good job. The admiral in charge of this has been very good. I talked to a few of our companies yesterday on the ventilator space, and we had this discussion: do we need a czar? And the overwhelming response was no. Right now, they're delivering, and the coordination has been excellent. We don't need another layer, I think, right now. And so maybe at some point we need that, but I think what we're doing now is working really well.
Well, and I think the way FEMA's been managing this, look, FEMA has had a suspect reputation in leadership ever since Katrina and George Bush, and you're doing a good job, Brownie, and all that, and they didn't do a good job, and it was all justifiably so. But under President Trump, FEMA has been a revitalized organization. I think you see that now. Scott, I want to get the ventilators. Nobody even knew what ventilators were up until about a month ago. And then we started watching Governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, on TV every day saying, we need 50,000 ventilators. We need ventilators. Now, all of a sudden, that became a household word. I did a story the other day on one company out of Newport Beach, California, that contracted with the government to produce ventilators on a lower end scale of $3,000. That got gobbled up by some bigger companies. How have you managed to increase ventilator production in the United States to meet this demand, Scott Whittaker?
Yeah, so let me give you a sense of where we were before the crisis hit. As an industry, we would produce about 600 or 700 ventilators a week for the need that we had domestically and to some degree abroad. About a week ago, we were doing about 2,000 or 3,000 a week, and we're scaling up to try to get 7,000 or 8,000 a week collectively by the end of this month, early next month. And the way we're doing it really is going to 24/7 manufacturing in all of our plants and all of our supplies. And so we may have an 8-hour shift in a normal day, but now we have 3 8-hour shifts that are going around the clock. And so the employees, the workers inside those facilities have really stepped up big time. you can triple your output if you're doing it 3 times a day as opposed to 1 time a day. And the urgency we put around that has been important. We've also moved to other manufacturing lines that might be doing or scaling up for a different product, but where those are appropriate, we'll scale up work on those other manufacturing lines as well. That allows us to really increase the production to meet the demand. And so we're pleased with where we are. I think the GMs and the Fords who are coming in to help with this has been good too. But it's the component parts, John, that is the area where we need a lot of help, and we may need more help going forward. There's about 1,700 individual component parts that go into a ventilator, including software and hardware. So it's not a simple proposition. We've got the expertise. We've done it well, and we're continuing to scale to meet the challenge.
So, Scott, let me get this straight with the ventilators. We're with Scott Whittaker, President and CEO of AdvaMed, with the world's largest medical tech association. So, Scott, you said that before the COVID-19 crisis hit, we were producing in the United States 600 to 700 ventilators a week. And you said now that's gone up to about, what, 2,200?
Yeah, between 2,000 and 3,000. I don't know the number today, but that's where we're heading. Yeah.
All right, so if you say average, you got about 2,500. So you've, in some cases, quadrupled 4X production. Now, I'm going to ask a tough question. A lot of people have been asking about pricing and a lot of concern during a crisis. Some companies tried to gouge. How have you, we're still in a free market economy, but really not right now because the government has to buy all this stuff. How have you managed that? How do you manage pricing to the governments, state and Fed?
So good question, John. I think you're seeing is what you're seeing is third parties come in, particularly in the more simple PPE space, but that's not a complicated manufacturing process, acquiring product, and then trying to mark up and sell those. And so we've been very clear. I put a statement out, which I'll share with you after this show, to be very clear about the fact that price gouging is never acceptable. We associated ourselves with the remarks of the President and the Attorney General and believe going after people who are trying to price gouge now is the right thing to do, and they should do it aggressively. As for our part, we have not adjusted our prices, and so we will continue pre-COVID level for the next weeks and beyond, and not make any changes to the pricing. It's just not something that's important to us. It goes back to what I said earlier. It's about the patients, not about profits, and so you're not going to see an adjustment for us. And we just want to get these to the hospitals that need them as quickly as we can.
Right, but what you have to be managing is third-party distributor. Look, for people, our listeners that are not familiar with this, I mean, I can be in the medical supply business and I can have a factory doing medical supply, but I don't have a sales organization. I don't have a distributor team, so I third-party out my distributors. I have preferred distributors. They buy the product from me and they distribute it. Right? So then they have a sales organization behind it. So what's happening, could happen in some instances, is not the companies you represent, but the third-party sales distributors buy it, and then it goes from 10,000 a ventilator to 15,000 instead of a 10% margin. They're getting a 50% because they've been able to buy all the supply because they indeed are the preferred distributors. That's kind of the way it works, and so you guys are managing that, right?
We are, and we're reminding.
We're jawboning it.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't manage it because you can't. They're independent companies, but you can put pressure on them.
The pressure coming down from the White House and the Attorney General, the combination of those two things is really important to control that problem that exists.
Great job, Scott. Thank you for being with us. That was a great segment. I really appreciate your leadership in this time of need for everybody, and you've been extremely insightful and forthright. Thank you so much.
John, I appreciate the chance to be on your show. Thanks for what you're doing, and have a great day.
All right. Scott Whittaker, President and CEO of AdvaMed, the world's largest medical tech association.